Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Navigating Change Management, an expert panel discussion presented by Velasio, which offers user-friendly software solutions to help greenhouse growers simplify their daily operations and provide them the production reporting and analytics they need to gain visibility into their operations. I'm Larry Oward, the custom content editor for Meister Media Worldwide, the publisher of Greenhouse Grower Magazine. In today's dynamic business landscape, the ability to navigate change effectively is crucial for success. If your business is gearing up for a significant technology investment, strategizing succession plans, or preparing for any transformative venture, managing change efficiently can make or break the endeavor. This webinar will feature an insightful panel discussion involving technology and change management experts. They will delve into strategies about how you can effectively communicate change with your people, prepare to adopt technology within your organization, and successfully prepare your business to sell. We will also have time for questions. If you would like to ask a question anytime during the presentation, just type it in the question pane at the lower corner of your screen and click Submit. Questions will be addressed at the end of the presentation. And now I'd like to introduce Melissa Herbst, who is moderating the webinar. Melissa is an account executive at Velasio and has been working exclusively with greenhouse growers for the last 5 years as they explore technology and ERP solutions. Before beginning the webinar, Melissa is going to introduce our panelists. Melissa?
Awesome. Thank you, Larry, for kicking us off, and thank you for the introduction. So I am thrilled to introduce our panelists today. So first up, we have Geneva McNeil. Now, Geneva just had a slight technical difficulty, and we anticipate that she will be on right shortly. We were here early, everything was working, so, you know, these things happen. But I am going to introduce her all the same. So Geneva is the CEO of GLM Leadership Solutions. So Geneva's been in the leadership and professional development space for over 20 years. And her expertise is helping businesses be successful, not just in short-term profitability, but also long-term sustainability. And that can only come from having a leadership culture that really inspires dedication and innovation from the team. So really excited to have her with us today. Next up, we also have Sarah Silver. So Sarah is the Industry Director of Horticulture Solutions at Velasio. Sarah is an ag industry veteran and is no stranger to navigating significant business changes. So in 2022, she sold her business silverware to Velasio and successfully helped her team navigate that change. She's going to share her experiences and insights today on how to effectively communicate with the organization and the role technology can play in selling your business. And then last but not least, we have Jackie Simmons. So Jackie is a consulting manager at Velasio. She has been working in the technology space for nearly a decade, and she takes a very special interest in helping businesses navigate the change that new technology brings. So she will share her insights and best practices that you can ultimately take and enable to ensure successful change management. So we're really looking forward to discussing managing organizational change today. Certainly the ability to navigate change effectively is crucial for businesses to stay agile and to grow. And managing change efficiently can really make or break any initiative. So let's go ahead and get started with our conversation.
And Geneva's here.
Yay!
Sorry about the delay.
No worries, no worries. So you're just in time, and we're ready to serve up our first question. And Jackie, I'm sending it your way. So what strategy do you recommend for businesses to set clear goals and objectives when planning for technology adoption or any transformative change? And the second part is, how can they ensure alignment with their overall business strategy?
Yeah, this is a great question to kind of kick it off. For me, I feel like there's two things that come to mind. Really, it's articulating that clear objective throughout the entire organization as number one. And number two, making sure that you have really measurable goals. So starting with the first, articulating those clear objectives, oftentimes senior leadership get in a room, they do these workshop strategy sessions, and they all leave with a very clear vision and strategy for what they want to do. But then they have to tell their direct reports, and the direct reports are told to tell their direct reports, and you just get this kind of watered down effect. And so I often recommend thoughts around a communication plan, being more prescriptive with your communications, things like that, to avoid that sort of telephone game. And then secondly, measurable goals. You get what you measure, right? So set expectations, measure those, make sure that they're attainable. You can coach around it, and define what your adoption KPIs are up front. So yeah, I hope that kind of gave a little bit of a color of things that I look for.
That sounds good. And when you say adoption KPIs, Jackie, do you mean KPIs just to measure the team's success of using the new technology versus backsliding maybe into using old tools versus measuring like results from the tech?
It's a little bit of both, right? So if I'm looking at adoption of a technology, there's some basic ones where you can even put together typically an adoption dashboard or something where it's, how many records are created over time by who and which individuals and whatnot. But you can also do more like anecdotal type studies to make sure that you're not backsliding into Excel and things like that. So just understanding what you want to measure, I think really helps drive behaviors.
The backslide into Excel.
It happens.
It does. It does. It does. I had a conversation recently with a client who was like, when we invest in this technology, I want to make sure that our teams are using it, right? I don't, because it happens, people just don't want to take on the new technology, and they will just revert to their old ways. And so putting support in place, right, to help people make that transition. Great. Thank you, Jackie. All right, Geneva, welcome. I'm sending the next question your way. All right, so change management often involves not only changes in processes, but also changes in mindset. What are some effective ways to foster a culture of change readiness within a company?
Well, I think with almost everything when it comes to change or the culture of an organization, it's almost always going to come from the top down. And what we see our leaders modeling with their acceptance of change and their kind of hunger or appetite for change is the kind of stuff that you can see oftentimes modeled down from layer to layer to layer to everybody to get to the boots on the ground. But one of the things what I'm talking about modeling that mindset of change readiness from the leadership means a number of different things. It means, first off, being able to call back and celebrate past changes that you've made and recognize, like reflecting back, remember when we used to do it like this and how much better it is now? So that we're consistently kind of celebrating some changes that we've made. So that gives us that mindset that change is very frequently good. And then the second thing is just recognizing sometimes we have a tendency, especially as owner leaders, to say, well, we've always done it this way. It's never been a problem like this before. So why should we change it now? And those kinds of leaders subtly put that mindset into everybody in the organization as well. Whereas leaders that say, hey, what can we change? What can we improve? What are the kinds of things that are working really great and we can maximize those? And where are the areas that we just kind of do them because that's the way we do them? And can we do something about that? So the third piece is to just acknowledge your own mindset as a leader. And no, that's the second piece. The third piece is actually to then give that same expression to everybody within the organization. So having a full-on communication strategy that includes listening to everybody who's going to be affected by certain changes, listening and hearing and really considering what impacts it might make to them as people in the organization, whether it's a technological change, an ownership change, a process or policy change, getting that two-way communication back and forth so people don't feel as though all of these changes are just happening to them without anybody really understanding the intricacies of how it might affect them, but instead having that trust that I know my leader recognizes what it's going to do to impact me, and we've talked about it, and so I can stomach it better, or my leader has an understanding of what it might affect, so they're going to make some adjustments to the change. And having that be a piece that's really important, because we got to remember that the people that are going to be affected by the change most are the ones that you need to get on board quickest. And so having some of those key stakeholders, we talked possibly having focus groups or having some at every different layer of the organization or at every different division within the organization, finding somebody to become an early adopter so that it's not the message coming just straight from the leader coming down, this is the change we're making, but rather from their peers, then their peers that are getting a chance to play around with it or getting a chance to know more about it so that they're hearing it from one of their own. That I think helps as well.
You know, Geneva, I was thinking as you were talking, things are going to go wrong in any project, whether it's technology or leadership change. There's going to be some stressful times or negative things that are happening. And I think how the leadership team responds to that is also really important. You know, I tend to get a little emotional, and I have to make sure that when something's not going quite right, that you communicate, you know, okay, this isn't great, but here's what we're going to do. Let's, you know, get through it. And I think if, so as much as the leadership team needs to be positive about the project, they also need to control any negative emotions for the.
I agree, Sarah. And I think one of the things to remember about that is setting clear expectations that it's not going to come out perfect the first time around. Set that expectation so when it does kind of need a tweak, you don't think of it as a failure, but more as it needs an adjustment. And that helps so that you don't get so like disappointed yourself. And also the team doesn't feel like, well, that was a waste of time.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. I was talking to an owner who had deployed and successfully deployed technology, and he came back. You know what this organization is really good at is like every year reviewing processes and bringing us back to tweak. And his feedback was like it made, you know, in the first iteration, life got better for a number of people, but one certain area it got harder. In this case, it was the shipping area. So we did a lot of work to enhance a number of processes, but the shipping area, like it took more steps and it was harder for them. And what I appreciated about his perspective was that he really listened to those shipping individuals. And then in the next iteration, we did work to really understand what was taking a long time for them and then making it simpler for them to use. So it's like, we made it better in a lot of areas, but there's still some people who life isn't better yet. So let's come back and address it. It was good. All right. Thank you, Geneva. All right, Sarah, I'm sending the next question to you. So can you share where you have seen clients manage the change of technology well? And what are some examples that really stand out to you?
Well, I have implemented a lot of ERP over the years, and I've seen it all. And I think our most successful projects, you know, the first thing Jackie mentioned before is when there were really clear objectives about how the project, what the goals of the project were. And often a project, you're not going to solve everything in the first phase. So there's, you know, a clear path of here's what we're going to do now, and then here's our plan to address future things, like the shipping in the future. So that's super important. Then, as Geneva said, we have to make sure leadership is engaged. If it's a project that's, you know, being if the executive sponsor is not at the highest level of the company, then there's going to be distractions. The executives are going to pull people away. They're not going to be focused. So our most successful projects are where, you know, the C-suite is totally on board with the project. They understand the project. They understand the time commitment of the project. Those are real. It's really important that they understand the time commitment. And they can't just say to someone, "Oh, wait, can you come do this for me for a couple of days or something like that? So it's super important that the executives are engaged. And then we also want to make sure that there's stakeholders engaged at every level of the organization. In your example, Melissa, let's have on the project team someone from the shipping department from the very beginning so they can kind of state their needs, and it's not just, oh, this is what the boss wants, but that there's people at all levels and they can become cheerleaders. And then we want to make sure that there's a really realistic timeline and budget. In the horticulture industry, we know we're not going to schedule anything going on during spring. Why would we do that? So we know we have to plan our project timeline so that there's a gap, and or we can be doing our work behind the scenes while you're busy doing your spring, and then we can come back at it in the summer if, we have to address those sorts of things. Anyone with a timeline that's not realistic is going to end up cramming too much into the project, and it's going to be unsuccessful.
Thank you.
I would like to add something to that, Sarah. When you are talking about having that realistic time frame and budget, just from my training and development background, I want to also add to that, part of that realistic time frame, that realistic budget needs to make sure that it's inclusive of the training that might be necessary for the people who are going to be adopting that new technology, because they are going to need to have a chance to learn it. Every time you have a new system or task or responsibility, it's going to be a training opportunity to start off with, and have a chance to get them to learn it, like not just get a job aid, but have a chance to learn it and put their hands on it and practice it before it goes live will really honestly help pave the way for it to be more successful.
Well, that's a great point. Thank you for adding that.
Okay, the next question, Jackie, I'm sending your way. So your expertise lies in helping businesses navigate change brought about by new technology. Can you provide some examples of common challenges that organizations face during technology adoption, and what your the best practices you would recommend for ensuring a successful change?
Yeah, I feel like I'm going to be slightly repetitive from Sarah and Geneva, but the three that come to mind for me, the first would be underestimating the scale of the change. So often we hear like, oh, it's just tech, or, it's just ERP that we're implementing. But typically changes come with varying aspects. So they might have an org structure change, job responsibility changes, just expectations in the workplace. Like there's a whole bunch of aspects to a person's job that you can change, and technology is just one piece of it. And so you don't want to neglect change fatigue in your org. So looking at it more holistically can help. And you need to adjust your pace based on the users a little bit. So if you're having massive changes in a reorg and you're implementing new tech, you need to think about what are some of the stabilizing factors that people can lean back on. So that's kind of number one. Underestimating the scale of change is often kind of one of the challenges that I see clients do. The second would be also minimizing the role of active and visible leadership. As Geneva and Sarah mentioned, you really need to embody the change and show your whole organization that you're behind it. Oftentimes I see, here's this direction from on high, and we've delegated this person to go lead the charge, and they might not have the appropriate authority within the organization to move the needle. And so you just need active sponsorship from the top, really visible and embodying the change. And then third, one size fits all on training, right? Like you can't do that. Like that's really not the case. Like you need to do persona-based training. You need to look at the needs of the individuals that are going to adopt the technology and cater your training approach for that. I often think about the differences between salespeople and finance people, and just their needs in training is so different. And so if you had like a one size fits all for training, people would get pretty salty with you. And I know Geneva has probably some additional thoughts on that one. So I don't know, I don't mean to punt it to you, but if you had any other thoughts on, challenges with training, I'd love to hear those.
Well, yeah, I have all sorts of thoughts on training, but you're absolutely right. And having the audience in mind when you're designing the training and recognizing that I think the concept of, when I say training, having a person who is an effective trainer present the training is one of the most important pieces, because you're absolutely right, Jackie. Having the IT guy that purchased the technology is, as just kind of going through the process, this is what's changed, is not going to be as effective as having somebody who's going to recognize for the sales group, this is how it will affect you and this is how it's going to benefit you. For the finance group, this is how it's going to affect you slightly differently and how it might benefit you slightly differently, and how you can both work together. And being able to cater that training to the audience is often overlooked. And people sometimes think that because you're good at the job itself that you can do the training for the job itself, and they're a different skill set. So being just conscious of that is a pretty big, important piece in my life. So thank you for pointing that.
I think we talked about it in our prep for this, but we often do some sort of train the trainer approach, or someone from the organization has been told, like, hey, you're going to go train everyone else. And ideal training curriculum, I believe, for 1 hour of classroom time, you should be doing 3 hours of prep, something along those lines. And, just giving the trainer the space to do that is kind of important, and goes back to your guys' comments around timeline, giving enough space for the training.
Plus, there's some dilution to training as it goes from, it's like a game of telephone, as it goes from one person to the next person to the next one. So I think it's important to have good training materials as well, so things don't get diluted down. And, unfortunately, when people are budget conscious, a lot of the documentation is what gets cut first. So you have to make sure you have good materials, or your rapport training, et cetera, so that it's repeatable.
And oftentimes, mid-sized to small companies, they don't have a person who is a dedicated trainer or a training department, et cetera, like larger or corporate companies might. But perhaps considering the option within your budget to be able to hire a contract trainer who would be able to deliver the same material essentially to everybody, so it doesn't get diluted as it goes down, and would be a little bit probably more skilled at the delivery of it, might be something to consider. It's not the full-time employee, but it's something that you can bring in a pro for something. Let the pros do what the pros do.
Yeah. Very good. Thanks, everyone. All right, Sarah, I'm sending the next one to you.
Okay.
So this is related to selling a business. So you're experienced in selling a business, and one that you created and grew and nurtured for over 20 years. So any lessons that you can share that may benefit others considering a similar path?
Yeah, and it was over 30 years. And in fact, someone pointed out that I had my business longer than I've had my children. So it was really a big change, something that I didn't recognize what I was really going to go through personally in the whole process. But I think the first thing is, especially as it relates to technology, you have to make sure you have everything in order. Whether you're changing leadership, or you're getting acquired, or you're getting investors, they're going to dig into your stuff, into all your numbers. And here we were a technology company. We sell ERP. So we had great software, and it was still, and we knew how to use it really well, but it was still a lot of work. And, so spend the time getting everything in order. There's going to be a lot of due diligence and documents, and every contract and every financial report. That's the first thing. So you want to make sure you have your kind of your financial house in order for all that. The other thing we did that helped us quite a bit is we had an outside advisor. It was a very emotional process. And as I mentioned before, I get a little emotional. So we had to make sure that we had someone who could, cut through that and tell us the facts and keep it real. And it was very helpful to have an advisor like that who really had no skin in the game other than to just help us, which was really, really helpful. As far as the employees go, one thing that I kind of thought they're going to have their same managers. It'll be business as usual. I wasn't prepared for what a big change it was for our staff. And even though everything was better as far as benefits and, as I said, management was staying the same, I thought, this will be easy for them. But people really take their jobs very seriously. And it was a huge personal change for everyone. And I think I would be sure to be more prepared for that in the future. People, you don't realize how seriously they take their jobs. As owners, we sometimes think, oh, they're just, coming, checking in and checking out every day. And people are not that. They overall are very invested in what they're doing every day, and they want to make sure it's successful, and they want to know what their career path is going to be, what their benefits are going to be, and what their longevity will be at this job. And so, hopefully you can communicate that really clearly to your team. And then finally, if you're the leader that's no longer going to be the leader, as I say, get ready to ride in the back seat, and just go for the ride and enjoy the view. It's a totally different mindset. And, Melissa knows, because we work closely together. Sometimes, I just have to just swallow it. Though my opinion, I think, is valued. At the same time, some things aren't my decision anymore. And it's a big change, especially after so many years. And so I like to say I had to do some personal change management. I wish I'd known Jackie back then, and she could have maybe helped me through some things. But it personally is a very big change, and you have to be ready for that. And as long as you accept it, it's totally fine. So that's my story.
That's a good story. It's funny. I appreciate the aspect of technology and getting ready for the transaction. I was working with actually an investment company who was evaluating a grower to purchase, and they were getting frustrated because they were like, they don't know what their inventory is. It's not consistent. They also don't know what their receivables are. Like this company had not had technology in place, and the investor ended up walking away because they didn't have the data. Yeah. They really wanted to value the company appropriately. So that was just something that triggered. We work with a lot of companies that maybe they're a family-owned grower that's been around so long, and everything just works. They do it. They do things that, it just works for them, but that's not transferable. And so, I think the same thing you experienced, we see often in that, as I said, you need to have your house in order, because we're not all going to live forever. And so we have to make sure that there's a path. And I talk a lot about daily acts of heroism that we see in all industries, where so many people, they go through like the 17 steps to do X, Y, and Z every day or every month. And that's not transferable. And that's where you have to let technology step in so that people can go on vacation or win the lottery or whatever, or retire. Yeah. Awesome. Thanks for that, Sarah.
Well, one of the things I'd like to double click on, Sarah, you mentioned about, you figured your team was going to be okay, and like leadership changes. One of the things that, we all kind of talked about that I'd like to bring up is the importance of the individual's manager. And so I forget the exact statistic, but I think it's over 50% of like the job satisfaction has to do with your direct manager, and like potential why you might leave, things like that. And then on top of that, I think it was like 6 months of ramp up time that you have to pay for a new employee to come in and replace that. So it's not just, job satisfaction with your manager, but then also the long-term implications of having to potentially replace those people. I don't have the statistics offhand.
Yeah.
But,
no, I've heard the same thing.
Yeah.
It's so easy to, do little acts of kindness to your team, and whether it's a transition, help them through it. And the benefits are, I think, exponential. And, to not have to reinvest in hiring, my God, that's the one thing I don't miss having to do is the hiring.
Yeah.
I think just because I'm this kind of nerd, I do have these statistics offhand. And according to Gallup, 73% of respondents for this kind of question will say that their direct manager or their leader that they see as the person that they report to is responsible for their loyalty and their morale, their commitment to the job and to the company. So people don't stay loyal to companies as much as they stay loyal to their leaders or who they see as leaders. And it is, depending on how high up, if you're an hourly person, it takes about 6 months to recoup the cost of losing an employee. But if you're in management or directorship or in that kind of that C-suite, it can go up to 18 months worth of investment to the cost to the company to replace a person. So just kind of adding to Jackie's point.
Nice, Geneva McNeil. Thank you. All right, Geneva, I'm sending the next one your way. All right, so balancing short-term profitability with the need for a culture that supports long-term success can be a challenge. Can you provide some actionable insights for leaders on how to strike this balance effectively, especially during transformative periods?
So I'm going to go right back to what we were just talking about with Sarah and Jackie about how the people that are in your organization are a really huge cost when it comes to losing those people. And oftentimes, if we handle things like change or leadership change poorly, if we don't communicate or if it feels as though it's being done to the employees, we tend to have a big drop in the amount of people that are staying. In addition, if we're making decisions just for that short-term profitability to increase efficiency or to increase profits, or to really kind of squeeze as much as we possibly can out of the organization, which means essentially out of the people that are doing the work. If they see that being the case, if they see your priority being on maximizing profits at the cost of the employee satisfaction, you're going to find a higher attrition rate, a higher turnover rate, and you're going to have that hidden cost of continuing to upskill your new people to come in and do that kind of stuff. Even at the point of the boots on the ground hourly employees, that takes a lot of it's instead of looking at the profit margin, you're looking at the loss margin. And so going to back to the concept of your leader being able to express the changes, being able to really pull people together to be on board and seeing as them being part of the change, as a part of a driver of that change, instead of having those changes being enacted upon them, is one of the best ways to bring people along and not lose as many people when you do have change. Like, so when we're in that transformational period. Another thing that we kind of talked about when we were doing a prep for this is a recognition of the changing workforce. Younger generations, Gen Z specifically, has a different priority when it comes to what kind of work that they're doing. So if you're looking from a management standpoint, perhaps from an older school, maximize priorities, profits all the time, you're going to have a difficult time engaging some of your younger, newer talent coming in at any level of the organization because the value set is slightly different. And they want to have a paycheck that pays their bills, et cetera, yes, but they're also very interested now in having both a kind of a work-life balance or the ability to walk away from work. They're not as interested in, putting their nose to the grindstone 60 hours a week because that doesn't seem very beneficial for them. In addition, the values of what the organization is working for. If they see you as kind of profit hungry, they're not going to be as interested. A lot of people in the younger generations are very disillusioned with what has kind of come about with late stage capitalism and how they see their financial futures going forward. And they're much more interested in being able to say, I want to have time away and being able to say, this is what I do for work, but not necessarily, I'm not working to live. I mean, my life is not work. Work is just one of the aspects of my life. As leaders, if we're asking them to have that same kind of commitment as we might have, I was brought up, socialized into that kind of mindset myself, I'm going to lose a lot of my people. So when we're talking about long-term success, we're talking about really hooking that next generation of leaders that are just now getting in the door and getting them committed to our vision, our mission, the values of the organization that we have, and walking that talk so that they stay committed. That long-term success comes from seeing demonstrated expression of those vision and values in real behavior.
Thanks for bringing that up. Yeah, as we were preparing for today, that was definitely one of my aha learnings, the value, the differences in generations and maybe what we're prioritizing. And you shared a story, someone who had been doing some succession planning with a family-owned business, and the next generation came in to lead, and the advisor came in to say, okay, we're ready to, here's how we can be more efficient and drive profit. And the new owner was like, wait. I mean, you tell the story. It was like, it's not about profit. I want my employees to be fulfilled.
Yeah. His argument was something along the lines of, I don't need a yacht. We don't need to have so much profits that I'm like rich. A boat would be nice. But what would be more important for me is that we can take Fridays off. And the idea of like, you mean you don't want to just get as much as you possibly can? You want just to get enough and be satisfied for your whole team to have enough? That's a mind-blowing concept. And it's, I think, more realistic for younger generations to feel that way.
That is awesome. And certainly as we plan and change, right, that generational difference needs to be, considered for sure.
Yeah. Which goes once again to being able to have your highest level of leadership actually have true one-on-one, not one-on-one always, but true communication with every level of your organization so that they actually recognize that that's what the people are going for, if that's what the people in your organization are going for. So
I was going to add that I've seen with Gen Z or younger folk that they change jobs more often than we ever did. I mean, my goals when I was young were to stay somewhere for a really long time. And I think there's this message to the younger generation about changing jobs frequently to increase your pay and, build your long-term wealth and build your resume. And, where I wouldn't look at a resume if someone hadn't stayed at jobs for more than, a year or two. I think there's this new thing where people are changing jobs more often. And to what we were talking about before about how expensive it is to replace people, this ties in with what we were saying about training. We just have to make sure we have repeatable ways to do training, because I do think we're going to see more turnover in the future with this younger generation. And we have to make sure we have repeatable ways to continue to train. So on technology or whatever it is you're doing, and so that you don't have to keep bringing in, your technology consultants to train because you have a new person, and instead, how can you own that training internally?
And it's interesting just talking about the new generation, as I've talked to different growers who are trying to attract a new generation of employees. And, the one funny story is it's like they're looking at technology and investing because of this. He's like, I brought someone in new and he sees, 1,000 potted plants on the ground, but it doesn't mean that you can sell them all, right? It's like we need the systems in place because the new generation is used to working with technology, and we want to bring them in and train them. I don't know. It was just a sidebar story.
Yeah.
Something that hasn't been mentioned, but is actually really topical with regards to technology and change and how we can go ahead and make training more scalable is if anybody, you can do multiple different commitments to a learning management system or an LMS, and you can create or select certain classes that can be self-paced training for everybody that's a new hire, all of your policies and procedures and things that don't have as much interactivity or hands-on can be done through that. So it doesn't have to take a human time to be able to do all of those things. In addition, as you mentioned, sometimes that's actually more accessible or easier for younger generations to really take in. Not necessarily everybody's like that, but that is one of the things that might be considered, so you can do that. So you're only having to train the actual hands-on stuff. And there are also classes that can be taken or lessons that can be learned about how to effectively do on-the-job training so that you're more effective at it, because sometimes bad training is worse than no training at all, depending on how it's delivered.
Good point. Thanks, Geneva. All right, Sarah, I'm sending a question your way. So technology can be a powerful driver of change. How can a business determine if their current technology or ways of operating are hindering their growth?
Wow, that's a great question. I think that people aren't just going to spend money on technology for no reason at all, right? So it's either there's some critical thing that's happening, their current software is end of life, or they have growth plans that the software won't support. And what we see, it goes back to what I mentioned before about daily acts of heroism. The longer you've had a system, the more people start, kludging their way around and doing manual things. You have to make sure that you're refocusing on training over time so that, people don't, as I think Jackie said, slip back into Excel, et cetera. But I think a real driver of knowing when it's time to invest in technology is what are those daily acts of heroism? What happens if someone goes on vacation, and what kind of mess is that going to create? Or, we've seen growers who are manually calculating their loads, and it's spring, it's completely unmanageable. How can they possibly scale a business when all the loads have to go through one person's brain, and you can't systematize that? It's just that's where I think it's when you live in fear of someone not being able to do what they do every day, and everything just falls apart, and investing in technology, when you go live on your new system, it might get a little ugly for a couple days. Sometimes it gets worse before it gets better. We have, in other industries, we have bought pizza for the UPS driver who's waiting and waiting for the orders to be ready. But it's, going back to the objectives, this is, you have to look at what the goals are. And I think that it's really time to invest when you have like this constant fear, this chip on your shoulder of when's the bottom going to fall out on this.
Yeah. I did work with a grower who their production manager, something happened to them overnight. And he was like, ooh, I can't. Right. Or, the story where one person does all the invoicing. It's stressful. The story, the one person does all the shipping in the middle of spring, has to excuse himself because the pressure is so immense.
Right. The volume goes crazy. And that's no way for anyone to live. And some people kind of fear their job security going away if they're not the hero every day, but they'll be a hero. A hero is going to be a hero no matter what they're doing. So they'll find other ways. So
that's so good. Well, thank you. Sure. All right. So this is a question for the entire panel. So in today's fast-paced business environment, the need for well-defined change management is evident. What, in your opinion, are the potential consequences of neglecting this aspect when implementing significant changes in a company? And how can businesses mitigate these risks? Who wants to go first?
I can kick it off. I don't have as thorough of an answer, I'm sure, as Geneva or Sarah, but the thing that comes to mind is, especially with tech implementations, I think there's inherently some fear around, is this going to replace my job? Am I still going to be needed? And the reality is, I think people worry about that far greater than that's actually the case. Most of the time, tech is being in place to scale, not to replace headcount, right? Like you want to do more with the same amount of people. And so I guess how to maybe mitigate that is just communicate more on what like the bigger picture vision is. I know that's kind of repetitive of what we've already talked about, but it's just so important, right? Back to those boots on the ground there. Now some orders are automated, that superstar person is probably afraid that now their job's not relevant, right? And that's not the culture you want. You want that superstar to feel more empowered, able to do more, excited about the change, and not job hunting on the side. So yeah, that I feel like fear is probably a big thing that you want to mitigate, right?
Good. Thanks, Jackie.
On a similar note, not necessarily fear that they're not going to be as relevant or they're not going to be as big of a deal. Oftentimes, we have people, when we do make a change like that, it takes away what I would call essentially status. I have been the subject matter expert on this particular system or on the way we have done things. And now we're going into this new technology, this new system that's going to streamline everything. And whereas in the past, everybody's come to me, I am Geneva, the sage with all of the answers. And I get this kind of sense of respect and status or stature among my peers. Whereas now I'm going to be thrown into the bunch with everybody else learning it brand new. And I won't have that opportunity to feel that kind of space. In fact, I might have a different kind of fear, not that I will be less important, but rather that other people might become the new experts on this because it's a new technology. Perhaps somebody adopts it faster. And so one of the ways to mitigate that, once again, is being able to say when we're going through a change, being able to make key stakeholders and all of the different divisions and all of the different levels be part of that process and recognize, hey, you've been our person that's been phenomenally leading the charge with regards to the way that we've always done it. Let me get you in here because you are the expert on that old way. Let's figure out how it applies to the new way, what we can bring forward that we can pull through and use as a transferable knowledge about the new system. And then also tell me what I need to recognize as the differences between the old way and the new way. So you're still being seen as the expert, you're still being seen as the sage. And then you also have the additional benefit of having those people not just be the early adopters of the change, whatever it happens to be, but also then being the cheerleaders for it. So they get to be kind of more excited about it from their perspective. And that helps everybody because then they, once again, they have a peer or somebody that they've always seen as the person kind of in charge of this. And they get to keep that, hold on to that.
Nice. Thank you, Geneva.
I would say I think that it was the consequence of not recognizing the need for change management. You know, any change is costly. You don't want to throw that money away. And I think if you don't really address the change management, it's very likely that though your project might not fail, it has a lot more risk associated with it. That you might get to 85% instead of 99% success or something like that. I think you really have to recognize that all it takes is just one little crack in the foundation, and it could be as easy as just the CEO patting someone on the back and saying, "Hey, I know this is hard for you," and that could. That invoice person and recognize what they're going through. I think it's super important. And, you don't want to throw that investment away in time and money. And you don't want to go back where you were. You want to be able to move forward. You don't want to slip back. So that's, I would say, obviously the biggest consequence is it was all a big waste. And we don't want that at all.
For sure. Thanks, Sarah.
Sure.
All right. As we wrap up our discussion, what would be your single most important piece of advice for our audience when it comes to effective change management in business?
So for me, it's establishing feedback loops. We've talked a lot about communication being clear going downwards, but having two-way communication where it's also being like feedback looped up is really important. Oftentimes we don't establish like focus groups or feedback groups, things like that. And so just, hearing from the individuals and hearing what's going on is going to be invaluable for you.
Thank you, Jackie.
I would say, from my perspective, one of the first things that always needs to be really top notch when it comes to change is the communication. And in that regard, communication of the new expectations, the new objectives being communicated with as far as how it's going to affect you or what changes are going to happen. And then remembering essentially the change model, which is very similar to like the stages of grief or the stages of any other kind of change. Essentially, it starts off with like a denial. Hey, we're probably not going to do this. It's not going to work. A little bit of resistance. Well, I like the old way better. And as you're in that resistance or denial, your productivity and your engagement goes down and down and down until you get to this middle point, which is your acceptance. Whether you like the change or don't like the change, you accept the change is really happening and we have to deal with it now. And at that point in time, when you get to acceptance is when we get into the exploration part of things. Okay, well, let's try it out, see how it works. And after a period of that, then we get to just adoption. That's the new way of doing things, the new normal. And for leaders that don't take into consideration that first pace happens, that people do get into denial, they do get into resistance. If they say, well, this is the way it's going to be, just do it. And they don't take into consideration the emotional impact that all change will happen on people slightly differently and take care to address that with the focus groups that Jackie has mentioned, with the training that we talked about before, with the ability to recognize that we have people whose status might be changing within the thing. If you fail to address the human part of the change, you're going to lose morale. You're going to have people dropping like flies. You're going to, like when you move a ficus plant and everything just drops off all the leaves. That's what is often happening because we only look at the nuts and bolts part of the change, but not the human side of the change.
So true. I think that you have to communicate what's in it for them, not just for the company, not just for the profits, but what's in it for each of the team members. And as I say, it's like climbing a mountain. Maybe you can describe to them the view once they get to the top, so they know what they're climbing for.
Nice.
Thank you. Thanks, all of you. So I've been perusing. We have questions from the audience. So those were the discussion topics that we planned, and we've got 3 questions from the audience I'm going to send your way. All right. The first one is, what are your recommendations for managing simultaneous technology transformation, expansion, and corporate maturity change? This organization is planning for growth. They're planning to add additional locations. They're considering going international, because I know who's asking this question. And they're looking to, they're putting technology in place as they're building the highway as they're building them all. So, any advice?
I think Jackie should take that one.
All right. I was formulating my thoughts. I mean, that to me, like thinking about all of the changes, you probably would want some sort of change center of excellence or some sort of group that's focused on change. That level of content that's in the question is probably far too much for a singular individual to own from even just a change perspective. I also would want to make sure that your plan has culture involved in it, because if I'm reading this correctly, it's not just tech, but you're expanding and your maturity is probably increasing. And with that, you're probably having a lot of new hires, and they're going to bring their own self to work, right? But we want to make sure that everything is cohesive and kind of in this positive culture of embracing change and pushing change forward. And so I guess my kind of off the cuff answer would be, I'd put together some sort of center of excellence around change that you can kind of manage this program and making sure that you're not forgetting various personas, you're not leaving departments behind, you're not putting too much change on certain individuals, and you're really pacing the change appropriately. You can still do change pretty quick. You just need to have really good planning and, organization around it so that it doesn't become absolute chaos.
Yeah.
That's my take, at least.
That's great. Thank you, Jackie. Did any of you want to add anything to what Jackie said?
Oh, I think that was awesome.
Yeah, thank you. All right, the next question is, when systematizing a process for which an established procedure does not already exist, how does one encourage following the new procedure and discourage falling back to the old way of doing things? Hallelujah. So there wasn't maybe a standard operating procedure to begin with. Now we're establishing one and putting it in a system. How do we make sure we don't backslide?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that I always coach leaders on is, at least on, say, I'll use sales as an example. Like, say you're used to just calling on the phone, like, hey, I'm going to make a deal, versus now you have to use a CRM tool and you got to put in your opportunities and all of this stuff. And we have stage gates, et cetera. Oftentimes sales leadership don't recognize that they themselves have to change their behaviors if they want to see changes on their team. A very specific concrete example would be, I'm only going to talk about your pipeline if it's in CRM. Like, show me the report where it's in CRM. This is our source of truth. And if you bring me a deal that's, pen and paper, not in the system, we can't process that. So putting in some sort of checks, and really at that point, having leadership stay accountable and saying, like, I'm going to embody this change and really push it. I think that helps a lot, especially, falling back to Word or, local drives and all of that stuff. Like, as a leader, if you're strong in your messaging, like, I'm only going to review these things if they are in the tool, then people end up not backsliding. And I know it sounds more stick than carrot, and it might be at first, but changing your culture, at least in like weekly meetings and like, hey, I'm going to pull up my screen share and that sort of stuff, can be softer ways to do that.
Mm-hmm.
I love using salespeople as examples because I'm the worst. And it is my boss using CRM and pulling reports from there to review that with me that has made me a better adopter. Way to go, Ben Bolte. Geneva, go ahead.
No, one thing that I would add to that, to Jackie, and to what you've said as well, is that accountability has to be consistent among everybody from top to bottom. So if you've got one of your senior people who's just a little bit of a stickler and wants to go with the old way, they need to also have the same accountability for it, because oftentimes if some people get to let slide because they're more senior and some people don't get let slide, then that creates resentments a little bit, and we get to certain feeling like it's a personal thing that I have to do it, but not everybody has to do it. And literally making sure that everybody is allowed to hold everybody else accountable and it's consistent takes all of the personal attack out of it. It's just the policy. It's just the way we're doing things now. Helps people to take it a little bit better.
And I think if you train the people on the new procedures using kind of things that Geneva and Jackie were mentioning, that, for example, you have to get in their headspace. You have to train them the way they need to be trained, and you have to make sure they know why we're doing this. It's not just because I said so. And if your culture is supportive, then, and you're patient, you know, if they keep slipping back, there's a reason they're slipping back, and try to get to the source of that reason so that you can, you know, guide them through the benefits of doing it the new way.
Thank you. Thank you, all of you. We have one more question, but Geneva, I might send this one to you. We'll see if we can follow up afterwards, because we have reached the end of our time. And so I don't want us to get cut off. So I want to thank all of you for your participation and input today, and the audience as well for joining us. And Larry, I think I'm turning it back to you to close us out.
Oh, Larry, you might be on mute.
Yes, I was on mute there since you guys were doing all the work. Hey, wonderful job. Very insightful. I'm sure people who were watching took a lot away from this. Excellent job.
Thank you.
And I want to thank everybody for attending the webinar. And of course, I want to thank Velazio for presenting it. And thanks to Melissa Herbst for doing such a great job moderating. And thanks to our panelists, Geneva McNeil, Sarah Silver, and Jackie Simmons. All of you, again, very insightful, excellent presentation. If you would like to contact one of our presenters, their information, contact information, is on your screen right now. Also, if you'd like to watch the webinar on demand or just check on different parts of it, it will be archived and available at the same link you used to get on today. You'll also receive a reminder of the archive by email tomorrow that will have the link in it. Thanks again for joining us.